Looks like we are live. I think. All right, I think we are good to go. So, all right, welcome everybody to session 10, the latest thinking on partner benefits and incentives, what is really working. We are really excited to have three fantastic presenters for you today. I'm personally very excited to hear what they have to say. So let me do a quick introduction of each of the speakers, and then we'll jump into the dialogue. All right, we've got Kenneth Fox, CEO of Channel Mechanics. Ken is an accomplished leader with over 20 years experience in the channel. He has a master's degree in software with an MBA. He's transformed Channel Mechanics from a startup company into an award-winning SaaS provider that is truly disrupting channel program execution, which you'll learn more about today. He is passionate about enabling our customers to get the most from their partners, and in his spare time, he provides a nonstop taxi service for his 4 children. We've got Emily Rainone. I'm sorry.
Rainone, it's okay.
Global Client Director of Program Management from Vistex. She's been in her role with Vistex for 7 years, working across many existing clients and new program implementations. She's focused on technology in the channel space for the last 11 years of her career. She's a proud wife and mother to Harper and Lazaro, ages 8 and 5. Great ages. Timm Hoyt, SVP, Global Partners and Alliance from Sumo Logic. He has been privileged to lead teams to deliver results via direct and indirect sales models, corporate strategies, strategic alliances across SaaS, enterprise software, and data center infrastructure providers. So a little bit of everything from Timm. 3 important priorities for Timm are to, number 1, hire, grow, and motivate top talent. Number 2, instigate revenue growth with an emphasis on profitability. Number 3, have fun and learn along the journey. His international perspective and broad network has been earned through experiences living and operating within the United States, the EMEA, Asia-Pac market. Timm has been part of the multiple integrations and culture adaptation successes through corporate acquisitions. So lots of incredible experience from this crew that we have speaking with us today. I'm going to start out by asking a couple pointed questions to get us started, and then we'll just kind of open up the dialogue. So Emily, what emerging trends are you seeing in partner incentive programs, and how are they reshaping traditional approaches?
I think we've seen some basic changes over the course of the last few years in our program specifically. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're reshaping traditional approaches, but we're seeing some things more in line of ease of doing business, and then some things focusing on strategic partners. So, in terms of ease of doing business, we're seeing an update to program structure that really supports simplification. I think we're moving towards, with rebates, moving towards cleaning out the clutter and paring down to what's working, based on, various KPIs and how things went on previous years. In consolidation of rebates, I think that we've really seen fewer rebates themselves, and again, just supporting a clearer structure, which I think not only supports the ability to understand on the partner side the multitude of things that they have offered to them, but it also supports understanding internally, which then I think is a better push for marketing. And then coming back through with those promotions, what's been left out, how can we have those short-term promotions to really create those bumps in sales that we need at quarter end or year end. I think that we're still seeing a lot of growth rebates in terms of rebates still on the rebate track, but we are seeing some of our clients focus a little bit more on obtaining certifications and rebating on that, or obtaining different various specializations, based on how their organization does things. So I think that simplification kind of serves the broader group. But then I also mentioned strategic partners. So the other thing that we're seeing is an even more focus on strategic partners. And what I mean by that in terms of rebates is, you know, are we looking at things at the large partner as a whole, or are we boiling down into those regional offices and into those country level offices to say, all right, what are the sales achievements that we're looking at within those little groups that boil up to a larger goal? What that means in terms of MDF is continued white glove support. You know, that's been a constant throughout. But then really aligning that back internally to say what kind of support do we have from our internal resources to make sure that partners are getting the white glove support that they need, to make sure that we're tracking the rebates and make sure that we're tracking the budgets on MDF throughout the cycle of the year.
Excellent. Great responses, Emily. Anybody have anything they want to add to that, or ready for the next question? All right. Ken, I'm going to give you the hot topic. So how can companies leverage data analytics and AI to optimize partner incentive strategies and better outcomes?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of the incentivization and the data analytics, like a lot of the incentives are driven by the data in the first place. So if we kind of drill down into that, and some of this follows on from the first question, is the incentivization strategy, I suppose, has evolved to meet the evolving channel. So paying different partner types, different values. You know, traditionally the resale partner is getting a rebate, or you're incentivizing an individual at it. So where the data starts to come into that is, who are you trying to influence? Because a lot of the times those deals have multiple people you want to influence in the deal. So we might see, you know, spiffing 2 to 3 individuals in the deal. So looking at the data and helping, or using AI to help you identify the key players. So often we would see now, you know, typically, or traditionally you would have paid the salesperson. Now people are rotating to pay the salesperson still, but who's helping the salesperson? The person doing the demo or the proof of concept, the technical people behind that. So, you know, the data now tells us that they are much more successful incentives and are really driving, you know, the behaviors that the vendor wants, the return on investment from further spend for that. And then back to the AI piece is kind of looking at, you know, the use case I suppose we have right now in AI is looking at, okay, who are my more successful partners? What are the characteristics of those partners that's making them, you know, here's my top 20. What's the next 20 in the list that have similar characteristics or attributes, and how can I incentivize those to get them up the stack, to sell more, to take more training, and so on. And then as you kind of break that down, you have across your entire partner ecosystem different levels of maturity of partners across that, even different partner types. So using AI and data analytics to look at those, what stages of maturity they're at, and then breaking out your incentivization strategy, because you incent, you know, your top tier partners very differently than you incentivize the next ones down and the next ones down, and so on. So I suppose, yeah, Brenda, that's the type of things we're seeing and doing to help vendors, you know, use the data to make key business decisions, to ensure that the incentivization strategy and indeed the money that goes into those incentives is being used to ultimately create that desired behavior, that whether it's selling or training or registering deals or consuming content or getting referrals, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Ken. We have a couple questions in the chat I'm going to jump over to. So the question is, can I incentivize partner sales teams directly? At least some of my partners don't seem to want this. There was a response to that. It looks like some countries you can't, right? There's governance issues and you just can't do it. But in countries where you can, how can you go about that, especially if your partners don't seem to really want you to, or should you?
Yeah, I'll first go at it if that's okay, Brenda. So this is I suppose often a misconception that in some countries, you know, I often hear people saying in Europe you can't incentivize individuals. You absolutely can. Now, certain partners, whether it's Europe or elsewhere, certain partners will want to opt out and say, no, I don't want you incentivizing my sales, my technical, whatever it might be. So what we've kind of got around that is, and it's been quite successful with a number of customers, is you offer the spiff or the incentive program to the partners and say, if you want to do it at the individual, you can. But if you don't, we'll actually offer that same incentive to you as a company. And an individual at the company might take ownership for divvying that out internally. And that seems to have worked really well. High participation rate, even across countries that typically would have opted out of that. Countries like Germany is a good example where we see that used now to pretty much 100%.
Yeah, great answer. I know that's something I've come across several different times in my career, right? That exact topic. There's another question.
Brenda, I wanted to say something about that too, is that a lot of times rewards programs and incentivizing the individual directly, it's a really expensive thing to do. And so if you haven't done this within your organization and you're thinking about doing it, absolutely a pilot within a certain subset of maybe each tier or something like that is worthwhile. You're never going to get everybody to agree to a rewards program because some people want to control that at their level. I see some of our clients continue to filter it through them and then divvy it out themselves. But I think certainly a pilot is warranted in this case because a full-blown rewards program can be pretty pricey.
Yeah, great point. That's definitely true. There was a clarification question for you, Ken. When you say incentivize differently by tiers, do you mean value or types of incentivization?
Yeah, so if we take, your typical, most vendors have 3 to 4, certainly the larger ones would have 3 to 4 tiers. And if you're offering, a growth rebate was mentioned earlier, we would often see that the percentage payout on, I'll just go gold, silver, bronze for simplicity, that the gold tier will get higher percentage payout, even on a line of revenue than the bronze tier. So you're always incenting your higher tiers. And kind of to one of the first questions you asked, Brenda, have incentives evolved? Yes, they absolutely have, because now we would see those rebates are getting a lot more complex. Vendors are saying, yeah, I'll pay the gold tier more, but if you take these certifications, I'll actually give you a 0.25% kicker. If you value versus volume, if you register more deals, I'll give you something else rather than just one big deal a year. I want to see, not all my eggs in one basket, etc., to get away from, the one-off deal versus the volume of deals. And all of these things added together makes it very attractive for partners to gravitate towards that vendor. So that's kind of your overall strategy.
No, that's a great response. We have some other questions in the chat. I will get to them, I promise, but I want to continue with a couple questions and then we'll kind of circle back and answer those. Timm, with the rise of remote work and virtual partnerships, how are companies adapting their incentive programs to effectively engage and motivate partners across geographies?
Yeah, I think good question. And, I think from the incentive point of view, you got to look at weaves a little bit into a couple of last questions. What are the personas you're trying to motivate, right? There's going to be senior leadership, which really care about, obviously, the broader new logo acquisition, expansion, and the associated profit margin that's there. And they're going to want rebates, right? A lot of the times, if you're a regional leader or even at the global or corporate side, a lot of their bonuses are paid on the rebates that are derived from vendors. And then you get down to individuals around what are the incentives that tie to them. And I think in the remote work world, one of the things we've seen is really driving the incentives around inputs and outputs, right? Inputs are going to be leading indicators, and these are behavioral ones. And Emily commented a bit about that. Things like accreditations or certifications, things like deal registrations. These are all inputs that lead to obviously mutually desired outputs, which are going to be acquisition of new logos, are going to be the revenue that are tied to those wins. And so, incentives of classic spiff dollars, having to adhere to, corporate or, country-specific regulations, as Kenneth talked about, are super important. And there's a number of ways to, I think, work through that. I think one of the other things that's really interesting are the experiences, right? Whether you have those experiences tied to just that individual and put them into, some sort of experience that includes, a spouse or a partner, right? Those are things that really drive that stickiness, right? And things that, can lead to some sort of brand receptivity and loyalty, as well as including that. And often I've seen times where they're invited to a larger event with the vendor themselves and get some of that executive touch as well. And so in the time of, remote work, which, there's a whole topic in itself there of people, wanting or being forced to come back. I think those experiences are absolutely ones that we see having more stickiness because you get the human to human interaction versus a Visa card showing up, which is great, but that sometimes kind of gets just lost in the daily shuffle of people's activities.
We heard this morning in the keynote with the partners, one of the gentlemen that was speaking said, when I'm face to face with somebody, that does it for me. My trust goes up. I let my guard down, even maybe to a fault. This is when I really start to feel good about the relationship. So I think that is I think it's still important across the board, whether it's vendor to partner to their customer, etc.
No, I think that's really important. I agree with that completely. Okay, let's ask. There are a couple. Let's see. Let me go back and ask. This one was for you, Emily. Sorry, it keeps moving because we keep adding. What are the trends in terms of front end and back versus back end rebates? You were talking about rebates in the first question.
Yeah. So, I talked a little bit about MDF. I think that MDF is still super important, right? To bring in the you said front end versus back end rebates or incentives?
Rebates.
I don't know that I'm seeing any varying trends on front end versus back end other than what I had already mentioned. But I do think, ahead of the rebates front, I do still think that MDF is very, very important. I think, I forget when it was, but there was a session, I'm not sure if it was through CFNA, that was talking about, is MDF still a valid thing? And I think it absolutely is. And we were actually on a call the other day with a CSM and, there was some things going on. And she made a comment and said, this activity that they, executed directly related to this close of sale down the line. And it was, something that had happened in the year prior. And that was really cool to hear that anecdotally, because I think that this happens more often than not. And so I don't think it's just rebates that we should focus on incentive wise. I think that MDF is still a really big part of it.
Great answer. All right, this is another really interesting question. I find this something that is definitely a topic of discussion. How do you ensure transparency and fairness in partner incentive programs, especially as partnerships become more complex and diverse? And I think thinking about that, obviously, from the partner's perspective of what they think is transparent and fair versus necessarily what we think is transparent and fair. Anybody can answer that one.
Well, as the program gets more complex, it definitely does. But it kind of comes down to, what's your program offer, what's your rules. So if we start, with back to the rebates maybe for a minute, is somebody asked the question about front end versus back end. I don't know, did they mean front end discount versus back end rebate? If it's obviously front end discount is much higher than a back end rebate, or it would be for the majority of at least what I see by a mile. But in terms of transparency and fairness, I think, you have a rebate or an incentive, it could be a spiff, it could be a complex rebate, multi-tiers, multifaceted. It depends on your tier, it depends on your revenue, it depends on the product, it depends on your training, all of these things. In terms of being transparent, and what we see a lot of is making sure that the partner sees what they're earning, when they're earning it, and why they're earning it, and delivering that with a very visual experience that they can see something. I will just use, like, for an example, we use often is a speedometer. So they see the needle moving, and most of these rebates are done on a quarterly basis. Mm-hmm. So 13 weeks in a quarter, they're generally driven by revenue and other attributes. So if you can show the partner, every time they log in, here's what you're earning, you're on week 1, here's your target, and here's how you're tracking to that target. And then beside it, a table of what contributes to that, what's going to move the needle, basically. Is it revenue? Is it a combination of revenue and training and so on? So in terms of transparency, obviously you publish the program itself, But partners are getting, remember, partners, excuse me, are getting so many programs, it gets lost. Whereas if you can show it to them in one screen, you know, that picture tells 1,000 words, basically, is a much better experience for your partners in terms of being transparent with them. And then on the back end, even for your own channel teams, having a dashboard that they can quickly see, I own 20 accounts. How are they all doing against that rebate? Where are they at against their target, be it MDF, be it rebate, be it a spiff? It's really important to help your account teams, and we all know channel teams are really stretched. So helping them help themselves and not having to go 10 different places to figure out, you know, is the rebate working or not? Giving them that simple to use dashboard is a really important part of transparency, and also helping the account teams become very sales focused. So if they know, you know, a partner is within 5K or 1 cert of getting a rebate, they can now work with the partner to achieve that within the time allowed, and ultimately the vendor succeeds and the program succeeds.
I agree with Ken. I think that dashboards are so key, both for admins on the back end, as you were saying, but then also for partners, being able to have the data visualization, where they are to attainment, and how they're getting there, what deals are going into those rebates, and really being able to drive into the data from those dashboards to say, okay, great, I think that I should have earned this and it should include X, Y, and Z, and then being able to very easily dive into that data to say, oh, yep, it was. I think that that's a huge piece of the transparency and partners understanding and feeling confident that they're following a program, following the program that they think they're following. And then I think the other thing that I was going to say about transparency is making sure that your T's and C's and your program guidelines are super clear. That's something that, you know, we include in our software, you know, via you vendors, and making sure that that's clear and that anyone can understand it, because if there's too much to understand, then you might just wash your hands of it and not want to. But making sure that things are super outlined and clear is key.
Look, I think just to add in from the vendor side, what Kenneth and Emily say, absolutely accurate in transparency. Relative to Brenda, your question on fairness, I think this all comes down to meritocracy, and you know, making sure there's clarity in the program. The real risk that I see is when the incentives and benefits become entitlement. And that's where vendors, I think, really need to look at time-bound ones, and also being authentic to the rules and meritocracy if you did or did not meet that. And I think bifurcating or being able to understand the different, if you want to call it, tiers of the partners that a vendor may work with, and understanding that maybe one of the big, you know, national global partners has different capabilities and volume ability to hit those meritocracy moments, versus maybe a regional is having some element of personalization to those. So you don't only go after the bigs, which of course is, you know, a moth to the flame, and a lot of really exciting things there, but there's plenty of great benefits that some of these regional partners offer. And so allowing them, based upon their capabilities to achieve some of that incentive realization, I think is important. Understanding the program, and you know, folks like Kenneth and Emily's companies help to simplify a lot of that.
No, it's a really great point. Great addition there, Tim. I could not agree with you more. Here's one more question that I think is super relevant to this as well. I don't know how many of you struggle with fostering collaboration across your communities, but how can companies foster collaboration and knowledge sharing among partners through incentive programs, particularly in highly competitive industries? Is that even something that you've seen successful or you think possible?
I've not seen it being successful. I've seen it being tried, but there's still, you know, it's not. I haven't seen a huge amount of it, Brenda, but there doesn't seem to be much take up on it. I think people are still a little bit weary of the competition. So kind of seeing that more dealt with through, you know, getting partner forums together in person versus trying to incentivize and create a community online. So yeah, that little enough. I see little enough of it, to be honest.
Tim, have you ever attempted anything like that or seen that work in your particular environment as a vendor?
Where there's better together stories, absolutely. Because every vendor obviously has their superpowers and can deliver that, but no one does everything alone. And when there's the opportunity to have that better together story, I think there's, number one, great value to the customer. We got to make sure we always start with what that answer is, and then you think about the partners and having a multiplier effect of multiple vendors in a solution is great for them for stickiness. It's great for them for their reputation of a solution provider, and often it's great for them in terms of the financials of the realization and profit margin. And then if you can bolster onto that the incentives of when there's a better together story, absolutely. And I have seen that in my career. It is threading the needle for sure. But when you've got a common enemy, in a sense, that is a great way to team up, again, with the best interest of the customer, but helping that partner understand where there's that unique value and what's in it for them in a multitude of ways, with the icing on the cake being sometimes some of these incentives we're talking about of double accelerators in a spiff, or you get together and do some sort of incentive trip that's tied to the performance of the collaboration there.
Excellent. Great response. I agree with that as well. I've seen that in our ecosystem where it's very, very much a better together story, but typically it's focused on like a vertical specific focus, right? You need to come together in order to be able to achieve the goals of that particular customer, and it tends to work out really well. So great. Thanks for that. Emily, did you want to add anything to that particular topic?
I don't have anything to add there.
All right. How do we navigate the balance between short-term incentives and long-term partner relationships, building incentive programs into the design?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the objectives of what you're trying to achieve. So there are different incentives for different objectives, be they short-term or long-term. Typically, we touched on the rebates, the MDF, the front-end discounting. They're all long-term strategies. Mm-hmm. That's not to say you couldn't run a short-term rebate. You typically wouldn't, but you can from time to time. We've seen them. But whereas the short-term ones are more around the individual incentives. So we want to spiff somebody for training. We want to spiff somebody for registering a deal, selling a new product, winning a first net new logo, whatever it might be. So I always kind of say when you're designing your incentivization strategy, we really need to think about what is it that you're trying to achieve, and you always should develop your incentive with those goals in mind. It can't be just a broad brush approach. I'm doing a rebate across everything for everybody. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure, the partners will take the money, but it's not, that's not going to achieve. It's not a very granular approach. So yeah, mapping out what I want to achieve or my goals, and what are the behaviors I want the partners to do to achieve those goals. That kind of thought process first.
I also think that here consistency is key. So where you might be going in and refining your incentives and your structures and what you're offering to partners, staying consistent on the way that you're communicating it and the cadence to which you're communicating these changes, finding the consistencies in what you are keeping in the program. Because again, when you're changing things consistently, it can be disruptive and even, obviously make partners pull away and not focus on the incentives, which then negates the whole reason that you're incentivizing for, because you're trying to push that behavior. So I think consistently focusing on what you do want them to do, obviously honing in on communication of the changes within the program. But I think that that leads to a simplification of the way that they're understanding, what you're offering.
Excellent. Thank you. There's a question from the chat. A common trend is incentivizing certifications. What is your take on that? How do we make sure that all the investment on upfront incentives result in driving the desired behaviors?
I think that incentivizing certifications is becoming, really big. I think it's important in driving behavior. Obviously, certifications, specializations, they're going to lead to further understanding of various pieces of your, offering. And I think I just think it's a something to focus on for sure. And I think incentivizing it is an easy way to do something like that, because then it puts a further focus on obtaining those certifications.
Yeah, great point. I'm just trying to, I know, Tim, you're doing a great job responding to a lot of the chat, so we don't have to ask the questions. That's great. Let's see. Ticket to entry, learn to play is almost always happening, especially as you consider who and what you're incentivizing. So that's just really an additional response to that. Is incentivizing learning the same as gamification? What's the difference?
It can be, but no, not necessarily. So most vendors will incentivize taking training because, you know, it's been around a long time. It's successful. I think Cisco were one of the first to set the trend on it, you know, because the more people they trained in their products, what else are they going to sell, that they become very much tied to that. We see very much in the cyber tech space now, it's huge. The amount of incentives paid out for certification is massive. You know, it's really, the last 3 years in particular, the individual training incentivization is just huge. How that's rewarded could be gamification. It could be just straightforward cash. And I think back to one of the earlier points, you know, how do you move the needle or make a difference on those? One of the things that's really important in terms of the execution, you know, be it a rebate, be it a split, is timely paying out. So if you're going to spiff a partner individual for taking training, you really need to, once they take it, literally try and pay them within 24 or 48 hours so they remember what they actually are getting paid for. It's no good paying it a month later.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I think, Ken, one of the things that's also super important, sorry, Brenda, is I agree with that. I agree with that statement, time to money. But it's also not wasting that meaningful moment, right? So if someone gets a certification, they've got some education enablement, what are they doing next? I think it's super important for the vendor, the technology vendor, to find a way to meet that person and have a discussion with a local field team, the partner team, to talk about, okay, you've been accredited, now let's talk about where are your accounts, or we've got some opportunities in the territory you'd like to bring to you. So they start to actually exercise that. I mean, for me anyway, right, I learned something. If I'm not using that pretty quickly, it's going to be in and out, and something else fills up that brain void. And so really timing that time to money, I totally agree, Kenneth, and also making sure that the local feet on the ground are there to say, you've been accredited, you've been trained. Now, how do we actually help you do something to go drive the end result we're all looking for in those outputs of customer wins, customer expansion, regardless of if there's any incremental incentives or not on top of that.
Yeah, and I think absolutely right, Tim. I think that kind of comes back to your overall strategy. It can't be just a one-off hit. There has to be a follow-up, and you might even incent on 3 steps later as well. So you're ultimately getting them to that end point, which is often revenue, right? So, you know, it's what is that sequence of events you need to do to be successful.
Brenda, I wanted to make a comment on something you and I had talked about previously, which is how are companies reimagining their incentives to better align with the changing needs of partner. And I was having a discussion with our payments team, and they were reminding me, you know, that across the board right now, they said that there's more elections than ever happening right now. There's a lot of global unrest and things going on, and this can lead to financial instability and insecurity. And so one of the things that we're kind of seeing across the board are some of our customers are implementing quick pay processes. We saw this a little bit during the pandemic when cash flow started to be of concern, and then it kind of went back to norm, I would say, end of 2021, back into 2022. But now, again, we're starting to see where, you know, some of our rebates customers, for instance, are making partial payments sooner than they normally would, you know, to where they would make a payment post close of quarter in a certain amount of time. They'll make it even quicker, and then have a reconciliation then, say on product that's been sent out, and making sure that all of that's been sent and it's a done deal and that there's no clawback that needs to happen. And then on the MDF side of things, we're seeing a lot more partial payment on multi-activity campaigns where there's a much larger plan. They're making shorter payments on pieces of that plan that have executed. And then quicker processes for one-time payments to, say, for instance, people that have gone through a certain vendor to execute a marketing activity or something of that sort, to where it's been pre-audited and then they can pay their partner back quicker. And so I'm seeing it in different use cases, but I'm seeing it across the board where the clients that I'm working with are really trying to get their partners paid faster and be creative about it so that they can, I guess, help partner cash flow.
Makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good strategy. Thanks for adding that, Emily. I think that's a really valuable insight.
Yeah.
This kind of builds on what we were just talking about. What are some best practices for measuring the success and impact of partner incentive programs beyond just revenue metrics? So Ken, obviously you were talking about dashboards and how to use AI to do some of those things, but what if you're taking it beyond that, like scorecards or things like that? What are some thoughts on that?
Yes, I think, yeah, again, obviously it depends on what the particular incentive, but yeah, managing, I always say, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So you have to measure, because often think about back to the start, when you've got to run an incentive, the first step is you'll have to justify it internally. What's the expected ROI going to be? Yeah. Is the budget in there for it? What's the margin impact, etc. So all of that analysis has to be done. So when you do go to run the program, you've got to be able to measure it. And again, there's so many different incentives, how you measure them, how you report on them, etc. But some of the most common or standard ones is it's really important to show the ROI on those, and that can be right from your top partner that does your most revenue, right down to the ones that are doing the 1s and 2 deals, etc., taking the 1s and 2s training. So yeah, literally it does come back, Brenda, to I suppose the dashboard. And that can look like, who's my top partner, and in the case of a rebate, how much have they earned on a week-by-week basis? Are you splitting that out across and rewarding different products or activities differently, right down, the chain, to both on the front end and the back end, helping the partner see it on one side of the coin and the account manager on the other side of the coin. So yeah, I think it really does come back to what I said earlier on the dashboards and reporting the metrics of those.
All right. Anybody else want to chime in on that? We have 1 minute left.
I agree with what Kim said. I think dashboards are so important in this piece. I mentioned earlier anecdotal feedback. I think anecdotal feedback from your CSMs and your CAMs or your field marketing managers and the people that are working with the partners is so key. And then solidifying what you think you're getting from the anecdotal feedback from partner surveys. I mean, that's nothing new, but people continue to do it and refine it and really ask the important questions, and then meet with a subset of partners to say, okay, how can we do this better? And let's execute this. So I think that those are other ways to focus on beyond the metrics.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tim, Emily, and Kenneth, for your time today and for your insights. I hope we shared some really great information with the crowd that they'll be able to utilize going forward. Please, everybody that participated today, make sure that you put your feedback in the survey when you get a chance to do that. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Brenda.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.